Amy Buller introduced her book. Many books have been written which rightly pay high tribute to those in Germany who from the beginning refused all compromise with the Nazis, deliberate or otherwise. They paid the price of their decision by exile or death in a concentration camp. Many more books and plays have been written about Nazi gangsters and not German traitors. I do not wish to minimize the appalling charge of ruthless brutality, of pillage and murder. The men who do these things are Germans, and their deeds are known throughout the world. But these stories are not about them. Between these two groups, there are the vast majority of the German people, about whom widely different generalizations are made. Many of these are based on false simplification. The stories in this book are an attempt to let certain representatives of a limited but very important section of Germans speak for themselves. What they have to say is significant, both because it throws light on how their enslavement came about and because they will have an important part to play in the rebuilding of Germany and in particular in the re-educating of the German youth. If every Nazi were slain tomorrow, we should be left with the deeper and more terrible phenomenon of a German youth in desperate need of a faith. That need must be met primarily by Germans themselves, for it is obvious that in such a situation, healing must come from within, and most certainly it cannot be forced on a defeated nation by victorious invaders. We must understand the full significance of the fact that a whole generation could so easily be led astray by false doctrine and become fanatical followers of such false prophets. Chapter 1: The Dilemma of a German Teacher. Of course I agree with you that the Nazi teaching about race is what you in England call rot. So said an intelligent teacher of geography. Well, what do you do about it in your school if you believe it is all rot? It must be difficult to carry on. Dr. Schuster rose and looked over the balcony, saying, "It would probably be all right to talk here, but one never knows, so let's talk of other things till we go inside later. I would like to tell you the kind of position I find myself in. It's a relief to talk to someone who is outside this struggle. We talk and talk among ourselves, but even among one's friends, one has to be careful, and I sometimes wonder if any one of us sees straight anymore. I will put it this way," he continued. "There are for me 4 possibilities for the future, and I must add I am very lucky, because for most of my colleagues there are only 2 possibilities, since they have no opportunities to go abroad, and having no money, they cannot retire. First, then, I may decide that it is impossible to remain in this country, where there is no longer any intellectual freedom, and where education is being degraded by political interference. I can argue that all I believe about true education is now at stake, and that it is quite impossible for me to allow political agents, often ignorant and stupid men, to interfere with my teaching of geography. Some of them don't seem to realize that any countries exist except Germany," he added, with a grunt of disgust. "I have now an opportunity to go to America, where I have been before. Shall I go? In many ways it would be a wonderful escape. My headmaster, who is new and young and a very keen Nazi, in fact, he would not have this post if he were not a party man, greatly hopes that I will leave. That is obvious, for he will get high praise if he can quickly obtain an all-Nazi staff. There is my first opportunity, to leave the country, because I have both friends and an opening abroad. The second way is for me to attempt to escape this revolution in my country altogether, by resigning from the school, digging in my garden, and writing books. I could even begin to prepare books on the teachings of geography and history. which will be much in demand when this disease of National Socialism is over. Perhaps I might even, in informal ways, help to challenge the Nazi teaching, since if I leave the school, I should not be under authority. The third way is to stay in my school, but to defy the headmaster and refuse to give Nazi lessons on race. This would soon end in an outburst. I might even try to do it in front of the whole school and denounce Hitler and all his works. That would mean prison, and of course, some of my colleagues are already there. Again, the headmaster would be very happy, and you will understand what I mean when I say I doubt if my witness would have any value for the boys. A few might be influenced, and later perhaps more, but at the moment, this new young headmaster has made a great impression on the majority of the boys. His predecessor was a bit elderly and conventional, and the boys feel now there is new life in action, and it is natural that they applaud this attack on scholarship, since it means they do not have to work so hard. Perhaps I should take this third choice, go to prison, and let a young Nazi take my job in the school. But let me tell you what I have done so far, for this is the fourth possibility. I must add, I am not happy, and there is a constant strain. I remain on the staff, and I pay lip service to all the Nazi school ceremonies, and I do not show any open hostility, at least not enough to get the sack, as you say, but quite enough to make my position precarious, and at times most unpleasant. I am trying, through the teaching of geography, to do everything in my power to give the boys knowledge, and I hope later on, judgment, so that when, as they grow older, the Nazi fever dies down, and it again becomes possible to offer some opposition, they may be prepared. I never refer to the party or its teaching directly, and the boys are, I think, mostly unaware that I am trying deliberately to undermine it. There are 4 or 5 masters who are non-Nazis left in our school now, and we all work on the same plan. If we leave, 4 Nazis will come in, and there will be no honest teaching in the whole school. Honest, did I say? Are we being honest, I sometimes wonder? It is very exhausting, as well as dangerous, to live under the strain of a deliberate compromise with evil, and unless we remain all the time sensitive to its perils, we may so easily become dishonest with ourselves, and then we are no good to the boys or to anyone else. But if I went to America and left others to it, would that be honest? Or are the only honest people those in prison cells? If only there could be some collective action among teachers. But we cannot meet in conference. We cannot have a newspaper. What do you think is honest? What would you do yourself? By the way, a hateful thing happened in our school last week. Our classics master is quiet and reserved and physically neither strong nor active. He is simply nauseated by all this Nazi show, with its bombast and vulgarity, and he hates the overemphasis on physical education at the expense of decent learning. He tries to take no part in anything, but of course he has to be present at the endless Nazi ceremonies we now have at the school. Poor man, he stands there with a sort of bewildered look on his face, as though he cannot understand why he suddenly finds himself in a sort of madhouse. I could laugh when I look at him, if I did not know his unspeakable misery. He cannot go away or resign, for he has a wife who is an invalid, and he has no money except what he earns, and he also helps his old mother, who has only a small pension because her husband was killed in the last war. Last week, this classics master, stung into protest by a vulgar speech made by a Gauleiter who visited the school, apparently said something into his senior form about how serious it was to discredit scholarship, for which Germany was renowned all over the world. That afternoon, after school, 6 young Nazis, his pupils, mind you, although most of them the stupidest boys in the form, seized him and ducked him in the river that runs through the school grounds. Of course, the headmaster ticked the boys off, but only rather formally, and they, as well as most of the school, knew perfectly well that the headmaster really admired the boys for doing it. The only really courageous protest came from the school caretaker. I wish you could have heard what he said to the boys, and they are a bit afraid of him because he is a big chap and was very angry. The discipline in the school is very bad now, for one of the things I notice more and more in many schools is that the boys who are models of discipline when they are in Nazi formation or doing exercises, they will make great sacrifices and show much endurance to reach really high standards of efficiency as young Nazis, are the same boys who in the rest of their school life show an appalling lack of discipline. It is a kind of reaction, I think, rather like an army kept under too strict control reacting later in violent excesses. It is difficult to tell you what I mean, but if you lived in my school, or in one of the others with Nazi headmasters, you would realize that there is an element of hysteria in the extreme discipline and effort expended in party organization. It is a very external kind of discipline, through which few of the Hitler Jugend have learned any personal moral and spiritual restraint, rather the reverse. But to return to my unfortunate colleague, his life is hell, and he has no way out of it. Of course the headmaster knows that, and hopes he will break down and resign. There are in Germany today men in that position in the teaching profession who would really be happier in a prison cell, but few of them feel free even to make such a decision, because it would involve their dependents in terrible hardship. I see some schoolmasters in a dire dilemma over this, and of course not only masters, but many other Germans who are in the civil service or in the church. It is much easier for a man, say in a bank or shop, as his job does not bring him into direct conflict with the party so easily. It is one thing to suffer yourself, but it is much harder to involve your wife and young children in misery. "Oh, I meant to tell you," said Dr. Schuster. "I invited my cousin to come and see you, as she loves England very much, and was an exchange teacher in your country for a year. She hates the Nazis as much as I do, but she also, as you say, sticks it out and goes to all the Nazi girls' camps and everywhere she can with her pupils, because she says she will not leave them to these dreadful Nazi women. Isn't that right, Elizabeth?" "Yes," she said. "I think it is important that we who oppose the Nazis should be cleverer than they are, and I am not giving in to them. It is difficult, but it can be done in lots of little ways. For instance, at all our summer camps we have fireside talks, which are often concerned with old German folklore. These Nazi women know only a very few stories, and they are the ones the party suggests, and the teachers repeat them until the children get bored. I know a great many more stories, and different ones." She laughed. "Sometimes I say to the children, 'Now I am going to make up some new German stories.' I try to make my stories exciting, and they teach quite different things from the Nazi stories." "But don't the other Nazi teachers see what you're after?" I said. "I have to be careful, of course, but so far I have been lucky. So many of the ardent Nazi women are of two kinds, either twisted, dissatisfied people, or just very stupid people. At least this is true of the older women. There are, of course, many quite young women who have been caught up in the movement and have not yet realized how dangerous it all is. But in my school, the only ones who would be hostile to what I do are the older women, and I am fortunate, because they are the very stupid sort." "But," I continued, "how do you teach history, which I think you said was your main subject? You do not believe the Nazi race theories, and yet you must teach them." will forgive me for saying so, but I got an idea from English schools how to do it." "Whatever do you mean?" I said. "Well, I spent 1 year in an English school, and I traveled to many others to listen to teaching, and I sometimes listened to scripture lessons. Sometimes these lessons were most interesting, and the children learnt a lot. At other times the teacher did not believe and was not herself interested, with the result that the lesson became formal. The children, quick to grasp the true position, learnt nothing whatever. I can assure you that many teachers in Germany today give purely formal Nazi lessons, and the children all know perfectly well that it is formal, and that the teacher is forced to give them those lessons. Nazi race theories can quite easily be made very dull, whereas I try to make my other lessons as interesting as possible. At times my Nazi lesson and my non-Nazi lesson don't fit too well, and when the children ask questions, I always answer, 'We do not discuss what the Führer tells us.' That is a perfectly good Nazi reply. I think in the end we shall win, and not the Führer or the Nazis." Elizabeth was quite excited now and continued, "I have a friend who teaches biology, and she has a great deal of fun along the same lines, because the children find her biology lessons very thrilling, and in the end they will realize that they all contradict the formal teaching. Of course, at times we get sick of the whole thing. After all, we only ask for freedom, to teach decently and without distortion. But when I feel tired and think of giving it up, I remember that would mean handing my school children over to the Nazis. I hope my friends in England understand that there are many more than those in prison who try to fight Nazi teaching, and if only war doesn't come, I still think this fever in our land will pass." As Franz said this, the door opened, and his mother entered. Hearing her son's last remark, she said with a grunt of disgust, "Sounds as though you are talking of our great new German Führer." Then turning to me, she said, "I expect in England you think we are all mad, for certainly the way we behave looks like it. I sometimes think the Führer is a strange kind of personification of the madness and evil of the last war, and all that it left behind in Germany. I know if we have another war, Germany will be to blame, for I understand it is impossible for any country to come to terms with the Nazis. But forgive me if I say that many of us can never understand whose fault it was that real peace was not made between our countries when we had different rulers in Germany. Perhaps there was in Europe, I mean in England and France also, too much poison left after the last war. I think that whereas near history will blame Germany alone if we have another war, and in a way that is right. When in future years historians write of the period since the last war, they will write many criticisms of all the countries, even though after 1933 they say Germany was the most to blame." The professor continued, "I want to visit England so much," he continued, "but now it is made impossible unless I consent with the carefully planned Nazi parties of schoolboys with Nazi youth leaders. As you know, before they go abroad, they have to go through a sort of training conference, and they are all told what they must say in England or France or wherever they go, and when they come back they have to go to another conference. It is almost like a kind of cleansing conference, to take away from them any wrong ideas they may have learnt abroad. One of the cleverest things these Nazis do when they are accused of being too nationalist is to reply, 'But we send more boys abroad than ever before.' They do not add that they take care to send them in such a way that it is difficult for them to learn anything. And I sometimes wonder if they spread rather dangerous propaganda among the young people of the countries they visit. They are young, happy, and enjoying themselves, and they know nothing about the bad side of National Socialism, so they are quite sincere. They are idealistic too, and I think they may give the boys in England false ideas about many things. How I would love to visit England and breathe freely again. But as my cousin says, the Nazis make that too difficult. And now, if we have war, we shall be fighting against the people who stand for the things we want to get back in this country. I think my cousin is wrong. War will never help us, for as my aunt says, National Socialism is a sort of disease left over from the last war and all the terrible years that followed. And if we have another war, then there will still be more disease in every land. No, I cannot see any hope in war. But if only it does not come, I think that in time we shall find a way to get back our freedom. As Elizabeth walked away into the darkness, I entered the hotel lounge and ordered a cup of coffee before going to bed. A great many young Nazis were sitting in groups round their glasses of beer, and as I watched them I felt bewildered. Some looked brutal enough, some stupid, some had twisted, unhappy faces, but many looked happy and healthy, and one or two very intelligent. All seemed alive and spoke as though they had a keen purpose in life. And as I sat and thought, the same question came back again and again. How and why did the great majority of the younger generation get caught up in a madness which meant that an excellent young teacher like Elizabeth must hurry home because her mother would be anxious lest harm had come to her, and that Franz was torn by a bitter conflict as to whether he could best serve his country by martyrdom, exile, or all the dangers of a deliberate compromise?